to EWNET Podcast episode 3. Today we'll be talking about women in academia, and EWNET Podcast is a platform for women researchers to amplify their voices and showcase their research work. I'm Dalaya and I'll be hosting this episode. Today we have with us Dr. Firehiwot Sintayehu, who is the Interim Vice Executive Dean for Research and Engagement at the College of Social Sciences, Arts and Humanities in Addis Ababa University. Dr. Ferehiwot will be sharing with us her research journey, including the R.ቪ EWNET commissioned research on women in academia. Welcome, Dr. Ferehiwot.
Thank you very much.
First, I want to ask you, what does your title mean?
Yeah, let me first start by thanking you for this invitation. And my new position is it's just a recent one, but basically the way I understand it, it's mainly because the university doesn't only teach but also conduct research and community engagement, and my position is specific to the College of Social Sciences, Arts and Humanities, and in that college I'm supposed to oversee and coordinate as well as support research as well as community engagement works that we engage in as a college. And basically these are things that are done by the departments and the centers, generally the units within the College of Social Sciences, Arts and Humanities. So that's basically my role, and still new to the position, so I can't say really much about.
That's really good, and congratulations. We're very happy to see women, moving forward and advancing their career in research and universities. So before we go into the research work that you have done, why don't you share with us who Ferehiwot is, her research journey, what made you come to research, and the whole process of where you are today.
Okay, I am assistant professor of political science and international relations. And to start with my educational background, I did my undergrad studies, basically my BA in political science and international relations, my MA in international relations, and then my terminal degree, basically my PhD in political science. So I basically studied political science, international relations from different points of views. So specifically looking at my research journey, I started thinking about research when I was doing my master's. So basically when I conducted my master's thesis, it was really a meaningful research for me, mainly because at the time I was working with Save the Children UK, and I really wanted to link what I did there with what I was studying. And the research interest that I had was mainly in political economy, and I wanted to see more the foreign aid context in Ethiopia. So that's why I conducted my master's thesis on the productive safety net program. And back then it was just the first phase. So that's how I started. And it was such an interesting journey for me because I did it very much seriously, at least comparing my own research with other students. So it was such an interesting journey for me. And I had the opportunity to look at how people actually live on the grassroots, because mainly my background is Addis Ababa. I was born and raised here. That's the opportunity that I had, particularly about regarding knowing more about Ethiopia, knowing more about different institutions, the bilaterals, the government institutions, local government. So it was such an interesting journey for me, and that's how it started, and later on grew with other research experiences that I gathered, particularly after joining the university. And for me, that's also why I joined the university. Honestly speaking, I didn't really join the university to become to teach initially. It was more the research that inspired me more. Of course, later on, I developed a passion to teach, to interact with young people. But initially it was more the research that attracted me to the university, because I had a limited information, but that limited information that I had was, it's not only teaching that you do in university, in the academia, but you also do research. And that's what I also continue to do. And in addition to research, I also facilitate various trainings. Yeah, so I have very deep experience, rich experience in research, but I'm also a teacher, as I was saying earlier, advising students, supervising their research, master's, BA, PhD research, as well as working with various organizations as, facilitating trainings, conducting consulting works, and other research activities. Yeah.
No, that's really great. So, as you know, one of the objectives of EWNET is to understand and, of course, to support with knowledge about the experiences of women researchers, both in academia and policy. That's one of the key reasons why Rift Valley Institute, in collaboration with EWNET, commissioned the research on women in academia, specifically looking at Addis Ababa University. So why don't you tell us why you are interested to do this research, and of course why you think such research is important, and with that also why don't you tell us about the research design in general?
Okay, let me start from why I decided to conduct this research and why I was really interested to be part of this research when I heard about the activity itself. I didn't mention my research areas earlier. So one of the research areas, my own research areas, is gender relations, studying gender relations at different levels. So previously I had opportunity to study gender relations at different levels with various research institutions, think tanks that I collaborated with. So, for example, I had the chance to study the gender relations at the very local level when I was involved in one of the participatory research with the Forum for Social Studies. So it was such an interesting journey for me because it made me, it was an eye-opener in terms of how gender relations operate at different structures. And in that particular instance, I had the opportunity to study how gender relations operate within specific cultural contexts. So that was an eye-opener for me personally. And then I also studied the state of women factory workers in the textile industries more recently. So this is in the industrial parks. Then I also conduct gender research, particularly studying the different levels, the different structures of government, basically the legislative and the executive in different instances. And I conducted an assessment on political parties, women's engagement, participation, different levels of engagement in political parties. So obviously I was very much interested in this particular instance because, I was studying gender relations in various contexts, and this particular research is very close to me. I operate in the other structures as well, but this one was very much close to me, the university, the academia. So that's why it was an interesting activity for me personally. So that's why I decided to also go for this particular work. And when we go to the design was mainly a qualitative research because one of the things that, looking at the terms of references and in terms of discussing what's important was the experience of these women, the women in the academia, how they operate and so on. So to document that, it was mainly a qualitative research, which was based on in-depth types of interviews that I was conducting with I conducted in-depth interviews with 8 women, and in terms of to stratify, to document experiences at different levels, what we decided to do was basically look into the experiences, the stories from more or less junior colleagues, those who have just joined the universities had less experience in terms of conducting research, but who didn't really complete in those instances their PhDs yet. So then that was one category, and then another category of more senior researchers, who had better experience in leading research, in being part of research groups. So basically in this sense, it was mainly based on these experiences. Then it was, in terms of analysis, it was the analysis was more of deductive, because this is commissioned as you said, and the objective was obviously clear from the outset. So the analysis was also driven by the teams that were also structured in the objective. So it's more of a deductive, but there were some inductive hints that were not really thought of at the beginning, but later on emerged. So it was basically in this manner that we designed it. And the justification behind it, I also appreciated the initiative, because as EWNET, your interventions should obviously be based on knowledge of the challenge on the ground, the situation on the ground. So in that sense, I believe it's very much important to make the interventions knowledge-based.
That's great, Dr. Ferehiwot. I think you are the right person to do the research, because you are already in the academic space. So, of course, further in our discussion, we'll also hear from your personal reflections as well. So I know it's a long research, and it's very difficult to cover all the major discussions and findings in this podcast. But we want to hear from you about the key findings of the research. So, is there data that you can share with us, some case studies and stories, and also if you found things that are expected, surprising through this research journey?
Yeah. So as you said rightly, the findings are very broad to discuss, but just to focus on the major ones. The first thing that I would like to talk about is the underrepresentation of women. So the finding clearly stipulated that women in the academia generally are underrepresented if you look at the literature. But this particular research was focused on these humanities and social science fields, and the expectation is that there will be more women even in the academia, in the fields of social sciences and humanities. And that's also the international trend in the assumptions. But that's not true in our case, because the same type of trend is also found in the social sciences and humanities. So if we talk in terms of numbers, for example, in Addis Ababa Universities, these humanities and social science fields that were part of this research, women were represented were about 46 out of the 238 total number of staff. Wow. Right? And this is basically 16.2% in terms of percentage. So it's very low, even by international standards, by national standards, even by Addis Ababa University standards. So it was very low in terms of numbers. That's part of the major findings, personally. And then it's not only about the numbers, but the actual work that women do in terms of, be it in terms of conducting research, because the focus of this study was the research, right? So in terms of research, they didn't really have a great track record, particularly serving as principal investigators, for example, leading research, even engaging in research. They didn't really have a great track record. And similarly, publications. So when we talk about publications, we're not, in academia, as you know, we're not talking about publications in general, but publications in reputable journals is very low. The number of women publishing their works in reputable journal is very low. So representation from different perspectives, not only numbers, but their actual engagement, the type of engagement. And an interesting data that I found from literature is from Mazat's publication. She published her work in 2017, and it showed that in the Ethiopian Journal of Development Studies, back then, this was in 2017, there were only 12 authors and co-authors. Not only the lead authors, but even counting the co-authors, there were only 12 women who published in that journal. Imagine, in that journal in 2017 was operational for about 40 years.
Wow.
So this was really huge, and I'm sure if we did similar type of research or looking at the data actually in other journals, similar trends are there. Because even, and this is not only national, but also international. I've also looked at some studies that show the trend is somehow similar in international journals. So this was one of the findings, and sort of a continuation of the studies that were being conducted in the past. And then the second, in terms of the second issue that I would like to talk about in terms of findings is why. Why are women underrepresented generally, and why is their work not as significant as the men? And the major causes that transpired from this particular work were lack of, for example, mentors while joining the university, while becoming researchers, and then lack of networks. The networks that operated in the university and beyond were not really accessible, were not really understood by the female researchers that I interviewed. And then we also looked at some gender stereotypes that were there in the structure itself, and also in the community that they were studying, that they were operating, that they were living, right? And then the last one was this the challenge to strike the balance between work and life, the work-life balance. And the last one that I shouldn't forget is the mobility challenge that women have to freely move from one place to another to conduct their research. So these were the major challenge that really came out in terms of informing the experiences. And looking at stories, there are several stories in the research, as you know, but let me share with you two probably interesting ones, one from a senior colleague, and then another one who's just enrolled in her PhD study. So one of the senior colleagues that I talked to told me about her experience in her own institute when the staff members were allocating tasks, particularly when they were restructuring their journal back then. When they were structuring their journals and they were dividing roles. So when they were dividing roles, she was interested to engage in, for example, reviewing some papers, contributing, facilitating seminars, because those types of activities were being discussed. But when those types of activities were discussed, her name, not only her name, but also the names of other women colleagues were not really coming up. But then they reached a time where they started talking about who's going to handle the snacks and coffee. Then their name started to appear, and this is really part of the stereotypes, following the roles, the gender, the usual roles, following us to the university. And then an interesting story from a PhD student, as I was saying, was one PhD student that we interviewed, who's also part of the academic staff of the university, stated that she didn't really tell her parents that she was enrolled in the PhD program because they want her to get married, have children before she joins her PhD program, right? So this was really an interesting interview story for me, because the challenge don't only come from the university, but also from our family, from from the community at large. So again, this is an interesting and something that came as a surprise for me was again there were some female colleagues that really didn't think that gender or the gendered factors that we discussed or that were broadly discussed in the research really informed their experience. That's something that surprised me. Of course, it's not a lot of the interviews that came up with those types of arguments, but it was it was covered in the research in different ways, particularly, for example, how these women were particularly coming from the more junior sections of the informants. And then one of the reflections that I started having, maybe we'll talk about it later on, is that maybe when you are a junior or when you've just joined the university, the years of experience matter most, or you feel like that matters most rather than the gender factors that we discuss about, right? So that was a surprising type of finding, or story. Those types of stories were surprising for me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I enjoyed reading your work, and there are much more case studies and examples, like more than you spoke about. And you know, with the conception of EWNET in the beginning, we spoke about absence and presence of women. So there are a number of women who are actually present now. You know, with in the social sciences and humanities, we do see some numbers. We can't say they're fully absent, but we can't also say they're fully present as well. But then even those who are present now in the system, you find their voices are absent in publications and important spaces where you share, you know, like intellectual knowledge. So for us, it was almost an eye opener, of course, and at the same time, it's also amplifying the voices of women in this space. I also found the discussion on, for example, senior-junior relationships that you were talking about, which I also want you to say something about, is actually quite interesting, because we're talking about, yes, how women related to male colleagues, but we need to also discuss how women relate to other women as well, and in the various dimensions as well. And also, you know, that discussion about, you know, as, you know, junior scholars or junior researchers, you tend to disassociate yourself with the gender issue, because you don't want that label. But then when you operate in that space, when you take your time and when you have longer years of, you know, working in that space, you recognize that although you try to disassociate yourself from it, you can't escape it, because it's a serious structural issue. So I want to hear more from you about, you know, the relationship of women academics to other women, which I also know is shaped by structural factors as well. And maybe one other point on the networks, which I think is also important. And I connect with that so much on the policy discussions and the policy research as well, that the networking of, because those who dominate the structure also, you know, dominate the network as well. And to break into that network, to come into that space is already difficult. So maybe you can say a few words on those specific areas. It would be great.
Yeah. These are very much important for me, because we are conscious of the challenge in our own space as individuals, and we don't really make it part of the structure. Personally, for me, I didn't really understand the challenge that I had relating with the structure. And when it comes to mentorship, when you think about mentorship, when you have the opportunity to interact with other women, right? But those women are not really available in the first place, and those ones that are available are already really busy. And they're not only busy because of the work they have at the university as teachers and researchers, but they are busy because they are overburdened by their household responsibilities, right? So you don't even have the chance of meeting on the corridors, having coffee with those female colleagues, right? And, you know, for people like me, for example, I'm the only female staff in the department, right? So you don't really get that opportunity of having female colleagues mentoring you in any way, or telling you about the type of challenge that you would face in the university, right? So you tend to operate within that very narrow space that you know, right? You're bounded by, you know, for example, for me, by the department. Only the experiences in my department, only things that I do in my department. So that type of challenge is something that other women also talk about. And the networks are very much important, because you do research based on the type of networks that you have. It doesn't only work for the men, but it also works for women, right? So personally, I was fortunate to have some networks, but again, those were really limited for me, and also for the women that I talked to. And it was really interesting that even the senior ones that I talked to, when I talk about senior, it's of course the years of experiences, and also in terms of those who are working in the administration, who are really interacting with many people in the university. Even for them, they don't even understand the network itself, right? It's even difficult to define it, let alone join it, you know. So that has been very much interesting for me. And these networks are really, they are not really spaces that are in a way discovered by women. Of course, some women can be in those networks in one way or another, but they're not widely accessed. That's at least what the findings show me, and to a certain extent also in part of my experience.
We've discussed so much about the research and your conversation with other women, but I want to bring back the discussion back to you. How was the research process for you? How do you find yourself? How do you connect with the key findings of the research, and generally your personal reflection? Because I want to pull out your voice as well in this research.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, it was such an interesting journey, particularly when I was conducting this research. I was not only talking about the challenge, the experiences of other women, but also the challenge and the experiences that I have passed through. And there was a lot of reflection from my own side, from my own experience, from my own exposure. There were certain points of convergence with some of the experiences, and of course some points of divergence. So let me tell you about my in a way my own research journey, particularly within this context, the context of the research. In a way, I would say I was one of the fortunate ones, because I was listening to the stories of those who were really challenged in terms of the networks, who had zero networks, and then who had better networks, who had better opportunity in terms of getting mentors and so on, who are not necessarily male colleagues, but who had mentors in one way or another. And for me, while joining my department, I was fortunate in a way because I had mentors, but not necessarily women mentors. And in fact, my research journey is highly informed by the mentors, by the networks that I was able to establish from within the department. Because many of the research experiences that I gathered was not from within the department, but the works that I conducted with think tanks, like for example, the Forum for Social Studies. And those links were really established by the networks that I had within the department. But personally, from my own experience, I also relate to the challenge regarding networks of conducting research, serving as lead researcher, publishing, because my networks were limited. I had networks, I was fortunate, as I was saying, but it was really limited. For example, I am not really aware of those networks beyond my department, for example. And a lot is happening in that network. I am not aware of the networks that exist, widely, and to the extent that I can, to the extent of using all my potential, or most of my potential. So I really relate to those challenges. And then I also relate to the challenge of women who were struggling to balance, to strike a balance between their work responsibilities and family responsibilities. And in fact, because I didn't have a female mentor, for example, nobody really tells me about that. True. And And it really informs our experience as researchers. Because the time that we allocate for research, the time that we research is very much rigorous work. It requires a lot of labor. It requires a lot of time, and it requires a lot of focus. And many of these are compromised by this challenge of striking the balance and the guilt that I have. When I'm at work, I feel the guilt because I'm not at home. I'm not with my husband. I'm not with my children, you know. And then when I'm there, I feel the guilt of not being at work, not writing, not transcribing, not analyzing, those types of things. So I really relate to those challenges. And honestly, it was really an eye-opener for me, this research, because it made me feel like, wow, I'm not alone in this. And it really creates the solidarity that you're looking for. And yeah, it was such an interesting experience. And I found myself framing my challenge at structural levels, at different levels. And I felt that, I'm not alone.
So I know it was it was an important research, and we have tried to cover important important research questions within the research, but what gaps remain unanswered, or what questions remain unanswered? What gaps have you seen potentially for future research as well?
Yeah, so in terms of gaps or in terms of areas for future further research, you can think of expanding the scope, and you can also think of in terms of following certain analytical hints that were identified in this research. So in terms of expanding the scope, it's basically because it was focused on Addis Ababa University, and the context in Ethiopia would definitely vary, or it adds up to the experience that's happening, that we found in Addis Ababa University. Personally, that's what I think. You can think of what's happening in other public universities, for example, or even private university settings. And there are also female researchers that are not within the university, right? So working in research institutions, for think tanks, independently even. So is the experience in any way different for them? So that can be included. And then you can also contrast it with what's happening at Addis Ababa University, sort of a comparison, the similarities, the differences, and so on. And then in terms of following the analytical hints, and something that was really interesting for me in this particular research as well is, for example, the intersectionality. I feel like the intersectionality aspect has not been covered as much because, as you know, not all women experience the challenge in similar ways, right? So different identities, different experiences, different types of women living with different types of realities face the challenge in different ways. So at least in this particular research, the two types of intersectionality experiences that were found were, one, the junior senior years of experience within conducting research, teaching, existing in the academia in general, right? And the other one is probably the marital, those women that were married against those who are not married. And not only that, the women that had supportive husbands or life partners in general, vis-a-vis that don't, right? So those were types of the intersectionalities that were identified, but I feel like there are other aspects of for example, disability is an important point of intersection, because women with disability would definitely have a different type of experience, their own way of facing the challenge, addressing the challenge as well. Maybe other identities like socioeconomic groups, different socioeconomic group. A woman that's coming from a rural area, for example, would she have similar experiences as a woman coming from an urban area, an urban setting, right? So those types of intersectionalities can be further investigated in my personal point of view. And then the structural realities as well. This was more focusing on the experiences of the women, but the structure should be as much studied. The structure, not only the university structure, but also the national structure that we are operating in, and also the international structure that we are operating in. For example, the funding environment that we are operating in, because the funding is a major aspect of research, right? So, what type of context are we dealing with? And then the policy-wise as well, in-depth investigation into not only the university policy itself, but also even at the national level. What type of support is there? What type of institutional setting is there? So in that sense, in terms of scope and in terms of analytical issues, it can be addressed. That's where the research gaps are, I would say, or further research can happen.
I think you've raised very important points of further discussion, and I think one thing we also want to do at EWNET is, just like we have attempted to map the experiences of women academics in universities, we also want to do the same for women in policy, for example. Because as you know, EWNET is not only a network of academics, but also women doing research in general, even outside academics. So that's one of the important areas that we also plan to engage in. But I also think the intersectionalities that you've mentioned are quite important, because all women are not the same. I think we need to we need to highlight that as well. Like you said, women in different spaces, structures, as well as disabilities. I think it's very important to also amplify those voices again, and also to recognize that there is a difference even among women researchers, and how they experience opportunities, challenges, or even structural oppression. Maybe one thing I will ask you before we move to conclusion is, first I would like to hear about your choice to stay in academia, because we know that there are women who were in academia but who have left, but you are one of the few women who have stayed and who have continued to stay in academia. So that would be very interesting to hear, I am sure, for our listeners and viewers, and also maybe to talk about what potential avenues exist now to impact these changes that we've talked about. We know, for example, Addis Ababa University is going through a huge reform. There are now openings and opportunities to talk about restructuring institutions internally. So I mean, how does that process look like in terms of responding to the challenges of women in academia?
The main reason, as I was telling you at the beginning, the main reason for me to join the academia is being able to conduct research. So, and I obviously want to stay in the academia, and the thing that will make me stay is as far as I continue to conduct my research and then diversify my experiences, continue to meet new people, work with new organizations, right? And that's the dynamism that I really like about the environment, the academic environment. And that's how I managed to stay, and that's how I want to keep it going, to make sure that I stay, right? So it's to a certain extent up to the structure, but it's also my own personal effort and experience to try to stay, in terms of getting more opportunities, using those opportunities, and really delivering in those types of opportunities. So for me, I will stay as far as I keep on doing this. I keep on diversifying my connections, I keep on diversifying my engagement, and I keep on doing different things, because that's what I really like from being in the academia. It doesn't really give you a structure in which you have to operate in, and that's the at least the freedom that I like, and that's how I have stayed in the academia personally. In terms of the reform, honestly, it's something that we are still discovering in so many different ways, and in some aspects there might be positive things in the reform in terms of motivating us, in terms of availing resources and so on, but there will definitely also be challenges in my own personal perspective. And we are still engaging with the type of guidelines and the legislations that are coming up, you know, as individual members of the university, but also in our own different structures at departmental level, at the college level. So it's still in the making, and the extent to which it's going to benefit or disadvantage women in the academia is going to really depend on the final outcome, and whether there are going to be any flexibilities in terms of incorporating the changes that we are suggesting, not only as generally people, you know, staff working for the university, but specifically focusing on the challenge of women researchers that we're talking about, because the challenge, the context of women in generally, be it in as policy makers, be it as you know, in any type of sector, is going to be different from men. And unless there is that type of understanding from the university leadership, in my own personal view, personal opinion, and also from the discussions that I had with many of other female colleagues, is that unless that gendered experience realities, for example, the reproductive responsibilities, you know, exactly. Because when a woman has a child, then there's going to be some kind of distraction in her career, right? Because it's not only physical, but it's also an emotional type of responsibility and experience. And unless our systems are open to this, or unless they are going to consider these types of realities, women are not going to really survive. And we are complaining about the 16% now, but it may actually be less, even less. So it's really high time to also consider the gender realities and the differences, in fact. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Ferehiwot. I think EWNET is happy to be in the space to enhance the voices of women in research. And we've raised very important points about women researchers in academia, their experiences, what they're facing, including challenges of underrepresentation. So we've looked at their absence. We've looked at somehow their presence as well, but what their presence looks like. We've looked at, work-life balance. We've looked at, the informal networks that are quite important to advance academic career. But we've also seen your voice, which I think is quite important as well, because you have a lived experience already operating in the space. I think the message is clear that this is an important issue, and of course it's also high time for the reform also to consider this, but also to think about what aspects of the institutional arrangement that we have to change or we have to think about to amplify women's voices is quite important. I want to thank you for being with us today, Dr. Ferehiwot. It was an amazing discussion and very, very interesting research. I want to tell our listeners that EWNET will be publishing the research, and it will be available widely. It's circulated as well for people to have a look, but also to give their comments on the research as well. So to listen to this episode, you can go to the EWNET website, which is posted under this video. We're very happy to be here. Thank you so much.